Love talking about burn down in the middle of the summer. This seems crazy, Brian, when you're raising corn like this and you say, wait a minute, I don't want to burn things down, it's just starting to look good.
Yep, but our winter wheat is off the field already, harvest is complete, and you know what, weeds are going to be showing up soon, so we got to think about what we're going to burn down with. And in certain areas of the country where harvest does occur this early or earlier, maybe even 2 burn downs are going to be necessary. So today we wanted to talk a little about the contact killers and residual herbicides in your wheat burn down program.
Well, I'm glad you brought up residual because there is quite a bit of time yet before it's going to be frozen ground and snow out there perhaps and all these things. So you do have a long window that you have to keep weeds out. So it's not only important just to knock them down, you need to keep them out for a long time. And there are a number of different herbicides depending on what your crop rotation is that could be used for residual products.
Yeah, for many years people would just throw atrazine out there. Well, that's okay if you're going to go to corn, but we're not real big believers in putting atrazine down on bare soil. The reason why is atrazine can leach pretty easily. In other words, it can move down through soil pretty easily, and it's just a risk that we don't think is worth taking. So personally, I wouldn't use atrazine in my burn down program, but there are a lot of other good alternatives.
Well, there are products you may use for residual control and part of a wheat burn down program that you may not normally associate with the wheat crop. For example, Valor. We use a lot of Valor on our farm in our soybean fields. We use it as a pre to keep a lot of the broadleaf weeds out and some of the grasses. It actually works out pretty good during the summer months as a burn down in wheat, but also a residual control product, so maybe you can escape putting 2 burn down applications. Maybe you can just do 1 burn down, something mixed with Valor, and then that Valor has enough residual to get you to a fall seeding of a winter wheat crop.
Yeah, the thing with Valor that is nice is next year you could plant wheat again, you could plant corn, you could plant soybeans. You've got a lot of options there when you use Valor down. Now there are other things you could use, like take Prowl for example, but with Prowl, if you put that down, you probably don't want to plant wheat or corn. Now you're probably going to be stuck to plant soybeans. Same thing if you wanted to put down like Pursuit Plus, or there are a bunch of different options that you could do in the fall. Heck, even Dual, Harness, Outlook, Surpass, something like that. I know it may seem a little crazy and not very many people do this after wheat, but you certainly could, especially if it's early in the season and you're worried that you're going to have to burn down again. One of the other things, coming back to Valor real quick, is it does have some burn down activity too. So I know a lot of people all around the country are having problems controlling every last weed out there with Roundup anymore. With Valor, it does have good burn down activity to help that Roundup out.
That's the key part there. If you can get something to help your contact burner down or your product without residual, like Roundup for example, as you mentioned, there are a lot of weeds that are becoming resistant or very tolerant to Roundup. If you're looking at doing something as an addition to your burn down program, ask about that. Ask what kind of residual does that product have, and also, is it going to help me with added burn on any of these specific weeds that I have for issues?
Yeah, that's the whole thing. You got to get specific on what your weed problem really is. To sit in the office of your agronomist and say, oh yeah, I got to kill a whole bunch of weeds. Well, that really isn't good enough. If you tell them what your weed spectrum is, then they can help you get more specific. So again, for example, if you look at, let's say you're in a wheat rotation and it's all wheat and you have a lot of cheatgrass, maybe you want to throw some Maverick or some Prepare or something else in there to help a little bit on that cheatgrass and give you some residual going along with your Roundup.
Yep, or even some Valor. That's shown some decent residual on cheatgrass as well. Now, the other side of that may be weeds you need to burn down. And like I mentioned, with Roundup in general, it's going to control every weed out there. Now, there are some weeds, again, that are resistant, but it gets just about everything. Any other product you want to put out there, like a Valor, it's going to have a narrow weed spectrum where, okay, it's going to get these weeds, but it's not going to get those. So you do need to get out and do some scouting in your fields before you go out and spray. Don't just assume Roundup's going to kill everything. Talk to your local agronomist about what they're seeing. For example, in South Dakota, we're starting to see some kochia that's very tolerant to Roundup. We're also seeing common ragweed that is resistant to Roundup. When you have those kind of situations, if you just go out and start spraying a whole bunch of acres and think, well, I got it under control, you may not, and you may have a train wreck when you come back.
If you need to burn down with Roundup here in 3 weeks or so, I probably would not be buying my glyphosate today, or my Roundup or RT3 or whatever it is. Don't buy it today. I'd wait until right before you need to spray. That price just keeps coming down all the time. So that's all good news. The nice thing about that is now you can increase your rate and get that rate up there to where you need. One of the biggest issues we have with Roundup every year is in drier climates, and especially where it's been dry for a long time and hot, we have higher use rate, then you don't have nearly as many worries. I'd much rather go out there with 2 quarts of Roundup than 1. You'll have a lot better weed control.
On most weeds, again, you have to watch out. If you've got some resistant or really tolerant weeds, you may add something different. Now, one of the products that we get a lot of questions about, I'm going to ask you about this, Brian, since you've been around just a little bit longer than I have, is gramoxone. We get questions about that. Is that a good burn down? Is it cost effective? And how have the economics changed?
No, and no. I wouldn't use gramoxone as a burn down after wheat harvest. Here's the reason why. Gramoxone fits pretty well in the southern United States late in the spring when guys are finally planting and they've had weeds growing for a long time, and you're dealing with stuff that's a foot or 2 feet tall.
And you need quick burn down.
Same thing with some of these prevented plant acres in the northern U.S. It's great to use gramoxone because literally you can start spraying an 80-acre field. By the time you're done, the first stuff is already dead. That's kind of fun. And if you want to get out there and work that ground the very next day or even that day, you can do it. You can't do that with Roundup or any glyphosate. It's going to take a few days before this goes on. But the thing with wheat burn down, we're talking about little weeds and also a lot of small grasses. Okay, grasses are very easily controlled with Roundup. It takes a lot less Roundup to kill grasses than it does gramoxone, so you can do it much cheaper.
Well, the other thing is if you've got some perennial weeds out there, something like gramoxone just burns them down to the ground, or Roundup will actually work through the system, get down in the root system, and do a good job. So, if you've got perennials out there and you're doing a burn down after wheat harvest, use a good strong rate. Allow for some regrowth. So, say it's thistles. The thistles start growing up a little bit again, so they have plenty of leaf surface to catch that Roundup and take it in, and then use a good strong rate to get the job done right.
Yep, so I'd use 2 quarts of generic glyphosate or 44 ounces of RT3 in that particular situation when we're dealing with a lot of perennials. If all you have is a lot of annual weeds and some small grasses, there you might just get by with a pint of glyphosate along with some dicamba, Banville or Clarity, or 2,4-D, and that's a pretty easy and cheap way to do things.
One last question. We get a lot of questions from our non-farm viewers. Well, why are you spraying all the weeds when you aren't even going to plant the crop out there? Why don't you just do some tillage? And really it comes down to moisture and soil conservation. It's a lot better for the soil when we can leave the residue there, hold that moisture, and also prevent wind erosion or soil erosion with rainfall when we're leaving all the crop out there and all those dead weed carcasses as well.
Well, once again, wheat burn down is a big issue across the country. One of the most important things this year is just don't buy your product way ahead of time. Just wait until about the time you need it. That should be the lowest point for your glyphosate price.
Well, glyphosate may be getting a little bit cheaper, but will it control our weed of the week? We'll reveal that answer later in the show.